Okay, we're trying to make sense of Acts chapter 7. Okay, and today we're going to go over Sister Rhonda's notes that she sent, and I posted them yesterday, and maybe I'll post them again today. And also a couple of comments from from some of the saints on yesterday's post. Okay, we're trying to make sense of it because it's a complicated chapter. It's not speaking to us today. It's Stephen preaching to Israel. And I believe it's God speaking through him, offering to the Jews a chance for Christ to return as Israel's king and get it on as far as, bringing on the next step in God's creative purpose, which is to rule over the earth and start up the millennial reign of Christ. So maybe that was the whole purpose of Stephen's preaching. He's just telling them what a rotten bunch of boys they are for rejecting the prophets, stoning them, killing them, and then what do? They stone and kill Stephen too. Anyway, so Sister Rhonda says, she gives two links to PDF. She says this PDF, the first one this one will explain the reasoning and a closer look at the Sanhedrin in view in regard to Stephen and his speech, and holds valuable information in understanding the hierarchy of the religious system and the relation to the political system at the time of Christ. Now, make a note of that. The religious system has a hierarchy, and it has a relation to the political system. Oh my God, that's awful. That's an awful thought. Can we love God without being involved in a system? And a system that has a hierarchy? And a system that has a relationship to the political system of the time? Oh, anyway. So the reference there is Acts 6:15. There's nothing sweeter in my own personal experience than to love God and walk away from the religious system. It's confusing, because I grew up in the religious system and I thought this is all normal. For many years I thought that this is normal. We must go to church on Sunday. We must have bylaws. I got a funny story to tell you. In the 60s, the feminist movement was just coming into town, right? And I was in the 60s, I was only a teenager, and I was a member of the Pentecostal Holiness Church in Virginia. And since the feminists were coming into vogue, every year our church made a church manual. See, there's a hierarchy. They made a church manual of, bylaws and do's and don'ts. Well, long about 1967, the church manual said that women should not wear men's clothes. All right, so they were down to rules and regulations about what you should wear, and it was kind of a fight back against the feminist movement because they were coming around in men's pantsuit, right? At the beginning. Now, I don't know what the feminists are doing, but women should not wear men's clothes. And so I remember reading that and thinking, well, that's weird. And I never mentioned it or talked about it for many years. Well, some 30, 40, almost 50 years later, this famous celebrity sportscaster, I think his name was Marv Albert or something, he got busted, and it was national news because he was wearing women's clothes, and he got caught with a prostitute. And it was on front page, and the front page of the newspaper, along about 1998 or so, if I remember right. It said, Marv Albert gives transsexuals a bad name, or transvestites a bad name. And I never knew they had a good name, but I just thought the whole thing was weird anyway. So I was driving around that day thinking about how weird this news story is, that it would even be a news story, that some celebrity would get caught in women's clothes and having a prostitute in his room. What the hell's that? Well, anyway, it dawned on me, and later that day I called my mother. She was still alive at the time, and I said, Mom, and it was late at night, like I woke her up in the middle of the night, like midnight. Mom. She says, what is it, son? I said, remember how the Pentecostal Holiness Church, because she was still a member of the Pentecostal Holiness Church. I said, remember how the Pentecostal Holiness Church back in 1967 had this manual that said that women should not wear men's clothes? Remember how that said that? And she said, yeah. I said, Mom, it said nothing about men wearing women's clothes. What's the deal, Mom? What's the deal? And she said, good night, son, and hung up on me. She didn't appreciate my joke. And I'm telling you this right now to show you that religious systems have a hierarchy and a relation to the political system, and it gets them in trouble because they don't have an experience with God. They have an experience with a bunch of rules and regulations. And that's why in Galatians chapter 2, I think verse 12, it says, and certain men came from James to spy out our freedom and to enslave us again to bondage. Well, when Stephen was facing those religious leaders over this matter of what the heck are you and the disciples doing, healing people and turning them to God apart from our religious hierarchy and apart from our political relationships? You're pissing us off, Stephen, because they love that hierarchy and they love their association with the political system. And as soon as we finish up on chapter 7, you're going to see that not only do they kill Stephen, but all hell breaks loose and they start persecuting the whole church, so that the church is scattered and everybody has to slip out of town in the middle of the night. And I say everybody as a slight exaggeration. I'm sure that, in fact, there are some that still stay there, but it turns into hell when you start preaching that God has his own plan and his own purpose, and he doesn't need the religious system, the religious hierarchy, or the relation to the current political arm. Oh, God. Okay, let's get back to Sister Rhonda'S story here. Her notes. She says, I'm bringing up this angle to show how disapproval of Stephen's speech would have impacted the religious leaders. The backstory is the 10 northern tribes of Israel would have been released from the Assyrian exile about 650 BC. By 600 BC, the religious believers would have broken down to include influence of other Gentile nations. By this time, the Hellenists would have had over 600 years to grow in their own doctrine and popularize a variant of Judaism. In our day, growing up, we are taught and mostly brought into the church as our parents believe, and the same would be true for the first century. So, changing beliefs of the religious system would have been just as difficult back then as it is today. Yeah, that's true. Because we are kind of addicted to whatever we're handed from our youth, because thinking is hard. And I'll tell you something else that's even harder. Thinking about your thoughts, that's a really hard thing to do. And how do we have the thoughts that we have? Where did they come from? And are they true? Or are they mixed with inference and superstition and manipulation from outside authorities? Thinking about your thoughts is very hard. But that's what we're trying to do here when we study this book of Acts, because we want to know how we got here. What are the thoughts that we have today, and how do they match up with God's purpose, God's plan, and the ultimate realization that all is of God? Okay, back to Sister Rhonda. I'm bringing up the following info because it is also listed in the JBL chart. Hasmoneans were to establish the Maccabees, and the Hasmonean dynasty was active for a little more than 100 years and gone by the wayside before the time of Christ. The Maccabees were followers of a Jewish leader, Judas Maccabeus, lasting a little longer than the Hasmoneans, and yet had also gone by the wayside before the time of Christ. And when Jesus came on the scene, followers of the strayed religion were known as Hellenists. Doctrinal comparisons will focus mainly on the Pharisees and Sadducees, which made up the Sanhedrin. Free will. Pharisees mostly believed in free will. Sadducees definitely believed in free will. Eternal torment and Trinity. I could be totally washed up, but I don't think that at the time eternal torment teaching was introduced. I lean toward this teaching as well as the Trinity doctrine because being initiated in the Council of Nicaea in the 3rd century AD. Now, to keep the public masses in fear and controlled by the religion. Okay, that's a very good point. The Trinity and eternal torment were introduced to the public to keep them in fear and controlled by religion. On the subject of soul immortality. Though on the chart referenced in JBL, it mentions the Pharisees believed in resurrection and the Sadducees didn't believe in any resurrection. I've got to chuckle. The Sadducees believed that once you were dead, you were dead and dead and dead and would never again resurrect. Whew. Ken Johnson, in all his biblical research, believes the Pharisees subscribed to soul life after death, in addition to resurrection, as the Christian church does today. So remember I said, think about your thoughts. Where did we get these thoughts? So the immortal soul teaching comes from the Pharisees. Don't the Christians know that we shouldn't be imitating the Pharisees because they're full of pride? They make a nuisance of themselves in Jesus' day, and obviously today, because the Pentecostals, the Free Willers, the Baptists, they're all just Pharisees with a necktie. So far, Stephen, all ready to go, has 2 strikes against him. The priests of his day were opposed to his history lesson, much as the organized church of today is vehemently against Paul's gospel, in that it doesn't financially add benefit to their pocket. Tithing and Sunday Sabbath service. The Second Temple is still in existence, so tithing and Sunday Sabbath church services would have been in vogue. However, followers of the way, as taught by Jesus and the disciples, would not have, for the most part, darkened the doors of the synagogues. Followers of the way would not have darkened the doors of the synagogues. They didn't need to. There was so much going on in the ecclesia in Jerusalem, they didn't need to go to the synagogues. After all, Peter and John were flogged under the Jewish priests. Stephen was not subscribing to popular religious beliefs and touting the era of the priestly way, and that led to his demise. This is all I have to bring to the table. Hope it can be some use at Rhonda. Now listen, I'm going to do another one in just a minute to go over the other comments, but I thought Rhonda's notes were important enough to spend some time with. And I hope you enjoyed this. And grace to you. You don't need to hang out and darken the doors of any hierarchical system, religious system. Amen.